Ethan awoke to the searing heat of an alien desert, his body covered in sweat. His eyes opened slowly, and for a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. The dry air stung his throat, and his mind felt foggy, as if he had been asleep for far too long. He stood up, the sand shifting beneath his boots, and squinted at the vast landscape stretching out before him. The sky was a dull orange, with a sun that burned far too brightly, casting long shadows on the ground. Nothing around him seemed familiar. This wasn't Earth. It couldn't be. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his memories crash down on him. Earth. The name echoed in his mind like a whisper in the wind, but it felt so far away, like a dream from a lifetime ago. He had been part of the final mission to escape the planet, an effort to save humanity from the war that had destroyed it. But now, after what seemed like an eternity, he had woken up on a strange world. He wasn't sure how long he had been asleep. Was it days, months, years, or had it been even longer? His mind raced as he tried to remember how he had ended up here. The last thing he could recall was being part of a group of humans sent to find a new home among the stars. But something had gone wrong. The ship they were on had been damaged. There had been a crash, and then nothing. He had blacked out. A strange, robotic voice broke through the haze of his thoughts. "Leave the forgotten." The words were clear, yet they didn't make sense. What did it mean? He stumbled to his feet, his head spinning. The voice was gone now, leaving only silence. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, brushing off the sand that clung to his skin. He had no idea where he was, but one thing was clear: he needed to find answers. The world around him was desolate, stretching endlessly in every direction. There were no signs of life, no cities, no familiar landmarks. Nothing. He was utterly alone, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't the only one here. Ethan took a cautious step forward, his boots sinking into the soft sand. The heat was unbearable, and his throat felt like it was closing up. He needed water, and he needed shelter. But most of all, he needed to understand why he had been brought here. He had no idea how long he had been walking, but as the hours passed, the sun began to set, casting the desert in a deep reddish hue. The temperature dropped slightly, and Ethan found himself looking around for a place to rest. His body ached with exhaustion, and his mind raced with questions. He could no longer ignore the sense that something was out of place. Just as he was about to give in to the exhaustion, a faint sound reached his ears. At first, it was so quiet that he wasn't sure if he was imagining it. But then it grew louder, the unmistakable sound of marching feet. His heart skipped a beat. Could there be others here? He quickly scanned the horizon, but all he could see were more dunes, stretching endlessly in every direction. The sound was getting closer now, and Ethan's curiosity got the better of him. He started walking toward the source, his pace quickening as the sound of footsteps became more distinct. Then, through the haze of heat and dust, he saw it. A small group of figures, barely visible against the setting sun, moving across the desert. They were marching in formation, moving as if they were on a mission. But they were human. Ethan's heart raced as he realized that he wasn't alone after all. There were others here, people like him. He moved closer, his breath catching in his throat. As he approached, the figures became clearer. They were wearing worn-out clothing, their faces dirty and tired. But there was no mistaking it. They were human. The sight of them filled him with a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his chest. Ethan's first instinct was to call out to them, but something made him hesitate. He wasn't sure what to expect. Would they recognize him? Would they even be happy to see him? It had been so long since he had seen another human being, and he couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed. He took a step forward, then another, until he was close enough to make out the details of the group. There were men and women among them, their faces worn with the harsh realities of life on this alien desert. They didn't seem to notice him at first, too focused on their own journey. But as Ethan took another step, One of them turned and saw him. The person's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, they stood there in silence. Then, without warning, the group stopped and turned to face him. Ethan's heart raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. Who were these people? Why were they here? For a long moment, nobody spoke. Ethan stood there, feeling like an outsider in his own world. Then, a woman stepped forward. She was tall, with long dark hair and a stern expression. She studied him carefully, as if trying to figure out who he was. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Ethan hesitated for a moment before answering. I'm Ethan. I think I'm human." The woman's eyes narrowed, but she didn't say anything right away. She glanced over at the others, who were still watching him closely. Then she turned back to him. "You're human, all right," she said, her tone softening. "But what are you doing here? You're the last person I expected to see in this desert." Ethan's mind raced as he tried to make sense of her words. The last person. What did she mean? "I don't know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I woke up here. I don't know how long it's been, but it feels like I've been asleep for a long time." The woman's eyes softened with sympathy. "We've all been here for too long," she said quietly, "but we're not the only ones. There are others scattered across the desert. Some of them have lived here their whole lives, but most of us are refugees from Earth. We were sent here, exiled, with no way to return." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Exiled. What had happened to Earth? Why had they been sent here? Before he could ask any more questions, the woman spoke again. "My name is Sarah," she said, "and I'm the leader of this group. We've been trying to survive, trying to rebuild, but it's not easy in this place. The aliens," she paused, her face hardening. "They won't let us be. They hunt us. They control this world." Ethan's mind raced as he tried to process everything she had just said. He was no longer just a survivor of Earth. He was part of something much bigger. There were others like him, people who had been forgotten by time, exiled to this alien world. And somehow, he was the one who had to lead them. "I don't know how I can help," Ethan said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I'm just one man." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of determination and hope. "Maybe you're more than just one man," she said softly. "Maybe you're the one we've been waiting for." Ethan stared at her, feeling the weight of her words settle heavily on his shoulders. He didn't know how he could lead anyone, let alone 10,000 people, but there was something deep inside him that told him he had to try. For the first time since waking up in the desert, he felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could help these people. The winds began to pick up again, the sand swirling around them in small dust storms. Sarah turned to the others and motioned for them to keep moving. Ethan followed, unsure of what the future would hold, but determined to find out. As they walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever had happened to Earth, whatever had brought him here, the journey ahead would be long and dangerous. But for the first time in 50,000 years, Ethan felt like he was no longer alone. And that gave him a glimmer of hope. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a leader. The next few days were a blur for Ethan as he adjusted to his new reality. The harsh desert was a constant reminder of his exile, of everything lost. He tried to keep his mind focused, but the questions kept piling up. Why had Earth been destroyed? Who had brought them here, and why? And what was it that Sarah had said about the aliens, how they hunted them? There were so many unanswered questions, and Ethan's mind was desperate for answers. As he traveled with the group, he noticed the weariness in their faces, the fatigue that seemed to weigh heavily on them all. They moved with purpose, but there was an underlying sadness that permeated everything they did. They were survivors, yes, but survival wasn't enough. They needed more. They needed hope. And hope was something that Ethan, despite his own fear and confusion, felt compelled to give them. Sarah proved to be a capable leader, making decisions quickly and with a calm authority that Ethan couldn't help but admire. She was fierce, but there was a vulnerability in her eyes when she spoke of the past. There was a quiet grief that she kept hidden, one that Ethan could only begin to understand. He wondered if she blamed herself for their exile, if she felt responsible for the lives lost, the world they'd left behind. But she never spoke of it directly, always focusing on the present, always looking ahead. They made camp near the edge of a rocky outcrop one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Ethan sat by the fire, watching as the others settled into their makeshift shelters. The wind had died down, leaving behind a cold, biting stillness that made the desert feel even more alien. The stars above seemed to hang like distant diamonds, far beyond his reach. Sarah approached him after a while, her silhouette outlined against the firelight. She sat down beside him, her eyes scanning the dark horizon. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You've been quiet ever since we met." Ethan turned to her, feeling the weight of her gaze. "I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of this," he admitted. "I didn't expect to wake up in a desert. I didn't expect this." Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. "None of us did. We all thought we were going to a new world, a fresh start. But we ended up here. And here, the past doesn't matter. We can't change what happened. All we can do is survive." Ethan swallowed hard. He wanted to say something comforting, but the words didn't come. What could he say? They were survivors, but survival wasn't enough for him. It couldn't be. "Have you ever wondered if there's a way back?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "A way to go home?" Sarah's eyes darkened slightly, the shadows of the past creeping into her gaze. "I used to wonder that," she said, her voice quiet. "But after a while, I realized something. We're never going back. Earth is gone. There's nothing left for us there. The best we can do is find a way to live here, to build something new." Ethan's heart sank at the finality in her words. He had hoped that there might be a chance, a way to restore Earth, to bring back what they had lost. But it seemed like that hope was slipping further and further away. "How long have you been out here?" Ethan asked, his curiosity growing. "How did all of this happen?" Sarah was quiet for a long time, her eyes locked on the flames. "It's a long story," she said at last, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'll tell you this much. Earth was destroyed because we were too weak. The other species in the galaxy, they didn't care about us. They didn't care about what we built, what we had. And when they came for us, we couldn't fight back. We lost. And that's how we ended up here, cast away, abandoned by the very stars we once reached for." Ethan's chest tightened as he listened to her words. He knew the pain she carried, the bitterness of loss. It mirrored his own. They had both been abandoned. But that didn't mean they had to give up. The thought gnawed at him. "We don't have to be lost." Before he could respond, a figure appeared in the distance, walking towards them. It was one of the others from their group, a young man, probably in his early 20s, with short cropped hair and a determined look on his face. He waved at them as he drew near. "Sarah," the man said, his voice urgent. "There's something you need to see." Sarah stood up immediately, her body stiff with alertness. "What is it?" The man glanced at Ethan before speaking. "It's the aliens. They're closer than we thought. We spotted their ships on the horizon." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Aliens? The very thought of facing them sent a shiver down his spine. He had only heard stories, horrifying tales of the creatures who ruled over this world, but nothing could prepare him for the reality. And now, it seemed, they were coming. Sarah turned to Ethan, her face hardening with resolve. "You need to stay here. It's not safe to go out there." But Ethan wasn't listening. The moment he heard the word aliens, something deep inside him stirred, an instinct, a drive that he couldn't ignore. He had spent too long living in fear, too long letting others control his fate. No more. No, Ethan said, his voice firm. "I'm coming with you." Sarah looked at him, her expression a mix of surprise and concern. "Ethan." "I have to," he insisted. "If they're coming, we can't just sit here and wait for them to destroy us. We need to show them we're not afraid. We need to fight back." For a moment, there was silence between them, the crackling fire the only sound in the cold night. Then, slowly, Sarah nodded. "All right. But you stay close. And remember, don't try to be a hero. We need to survive, not die." Ethan didn't answer her. He didn't need to. He felt a fire building inside him, a fire that burned for Earth, for the people who had been lost, for the future that was still possible if they fought for it. He wasn't just going to let the aliens take everything without a fight. Not this time. As they moved into the desert night, the winds howled around them, the stars above as cold and distant as the world they now called home. But Ethan felt something inside him shift, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since the moment he'd woken up in this strange land. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a leader, and the fight for survival was just beginning. They walked toward the unknown, their path uncertain. But one thing was clear. If the aliens thought they could take what was left of humanity, they were wrong. Ethan and the people with him would show them that they were far from defeated. The air was thick with tension as Ethan, Sarah, and a small group of scouts moved through the desert, the distant lights of the alien ships shimmering on the horizon. The sky was a vast, endless void, the stars above cold and indifferent to the struggle below. Every step they took was careful, calculated, the sand shifting beneath their feet like an ever-present reminder of the fragile world they now called home. Ethan's mind was racing. The mere idea of confronting aliens, the very beings responsible for humanity's downfall, sent a shiver down his spine. But fear wasn't the only thing coursing through his veins. There was something else, something stronger, a fire, a burning rage that refused to be extinguished. He had lost too much already. They all had. Sarah raised a hand, signaling for the group to stop. She crouched low behind a jagged rock formation, her eyes locked on the distant glow. Ethan followed her gaze. The alien ships were closer than he had expected. Sleek, ominous, their dark metallic hulls glimmered under the pale light of the twin moons above. They were not just scouting. They were preparing for something. "They're setting up a perimeter," one of the scouts whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Looks like they're securing the area." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "They know we're here," she muttered. "Or at least, they suspect it." Ethan clenched his fists. "Then we hit them first." Sarah turned to him, her face unreadable. "You don't even know what we're up against." "I know enough," Ethan shot back. "We either make a stand or spend the rest of our lives running. And I'm done running." A flicker of something, approval, maybe, passed through Sarah's expression. She nodded. "All right, but we do this smart. We find out what they want first." The group moved closer, using the terrain for cover. The rocky outcrops provided some protection, but the aliens were advanced. Their technology far surpassed anything humanity had ever built. Stealth wouldn't last forever. As they got near, Ethan could make out the figures moving around the ships. They were tall, their movements fluid, almost unnatural. Their bodies were covered in intricate armor that shimmered as they moved. Their faces were hidden behind smooth, featureless masks that gave them an eerie, inhuman quality. Ethan's pulse quickened. These were not just soldiers. These were enforcers, the ones who had hunted down the last remnants of humanity, the ones responsible for driving them to this wasteland. Sarah motioned for the group to stay low as she observed the aliens. "They're setting up a relay beacon," she whispered. "They're calling for reinforcements." Ethan felt a surge of anger. Reinforcements meant more troops, more ships, more destruction. They couldn't afford to wait. "We have to stop them," he said. Sarah exhaled sharply. "And how do you suggest we do that?" "Rush in and hope for the best." Ethan's mind was racing. They didn't have weapons, not real ones. Most of what they carried were makeshift tools, scavenged from the ruins of past settlements. But they had something more important: desperation. And sometimes, desperation was the deadliest weapon of all. He turned to the others. "We don't need to fight them head-on. We just need to stop that beacon from going online." A murmur ran through the group. It was risky. Suicide, even. But they all knew the alternative. If the aliens called reinforcements, there would be no escape. They would be hunted down, one by one. Sarah studied Ethan for a long moment before nodding. "All right, but we do this carefully. No unnecessary risks." Ethan nodded. Agreed. They split into two groups. Sarah and the scouts would create a distraction, drawing the aliens away from the beacon. Ethan and two others, Jonas and Lion, would sneak in and destroy it. As they moved into position, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The first real strike against the enemy. The first step towards something bigger. Sarah gave the signal, and all hell broke loose. A series of loud explosions erupted in the distance as Sarah and her group set off crude but effective traps. The aliens reacted instantly, moving toward the noise with swift precision. Their movements were eerily coordinated, their sleek forms blending into the darkness as they moved to investigate. Ethan took a deep breath. Now, they sprinted toward the beacon, keeping low to the ground. The structure was a towering piece of alien machinery, its core pulsating with an eerie blue light. Strange symbols flickered across its surface, shifting and changing as it powered up. Jonas pulled out a rusted metal pipe, one of the few weapons they had. "How do we take it out?" Ethan glanced around, searching for a weakness. "The power source," he said, pointing to the glowing core. "We take that out. The whole thing goes down." Lion hesitated. "You sure about this?" Ethan didn't answer. He just ran. The moment he reached the beacon, he slammed his makeshift weapon against the glowing core. Sparks erupted from the impact, and the beacon let out a high-pitched whine. The symbols on its surface flickered erratically. Jonas followed suit, striking the machinery with everything he had. The beacon shuddered, its glow dimming. Then came the sound Ethan had been dreading, the sharp mechanical hiss of the aliens turning their attention back toward them. "We're out of time," Lion shouted. Ethan delivered one final blow to the beacon, and this time, the core cracked. A surge of energy burst outward, sending a pulse of blue light across the desert. For a brief moment, everything was silent. Then the beacon exploded. The force sent Ethan tumbling backward, sand and debris raining down around him. His ears rang, his vision blurred. But as he struggled to his feet, he saw something that sent a chill down his spine. The aliens were coming, and they were fast. Jonas grabbed Ethan by the arm. "Run." They sprinted away from the wreckage, the sound of alien war cries filling the night. Ethan stole a glance over his shoulder. The aliens weren't just angry, they were furious. Sarah and her group appeared ahead, waving them forward. "Move," she shouted. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. As they ran, he realized something. This wasn't just an attack. This was a declaration. They had struck the first blow. And now, the war had truly begun. The night was alive with danger. The beacon's destruction had sent a shockwave through the enemy forces, and now they were hunting with a fury Ethan had never seen before. The alien soldiers moved with inhuman speed, their sleek armor reflecting the pale light of the twin moons. Their weapons pulsed with deadly energy, scanning the rocky terrain where Ethan and his group hid, their breaths shallow and controlled. They had made it back to the caves, barely. The jagged cliffs and winding tunnels had always been their refuge, but now, with the aliens searching for them, the shadows felt thinner, less safe. Every sound, every shifting rock sent waves of tension through the survivors. Ethan pressed his back against the cold stone, his heart pounding in his chest. Jonas crouched beside him, sweat glistening on his brow. Sarah was on the other side, her knife gripped tightly in her hands, her sharp eyes scanning the cave entrance. "They're not leaving," Jonas whispered, his voice barely audible. "They won't," Ethan muttered. "Not after what we did." Destroying the beacon wasn't just an act of defiance. It was war. The aliens would take it as a direct challenge, and their response would be swift and brutal. A faint clicking sound echoed through the cave, sending chills down Ethan's spine. It was the aliens' way of communicating, short, rapid bursts of sound that carried through the air. They weren't talking. They were hunting. Sarah motioned for silence, pressing a finger to her lips. Ethan held his breath as a shadow passed over the entrance. The alien was just outside, its elongated head tilting slightly as it listened. Its glowing visor scanned the darkness, searching. Then, without warning, it stepped in. Time slowed. The alien's smooth, metallic fingers curled around its weapon, the barrel humming with deadly energy. Its head turned, its glowing eyes locking onto Ethan. There was no time to think. Sarah moved first, springing from the shadows with terrifying speed. Her knife struck true, slicing into the gaps between the alien's armor. The creature let out a sharp, garbled screech, its weapon clattering to the ground. It staggered, but it wasn't dead. Its body convulsed, muscles shifting unnaturally as it fought back. Jonas lunged, driving a metal rod into its chest with all his strength. The alien let out a final, choked cry before collapsing. For a moment, nobody moved. Ethan exhaled, his pulse still racing. That was too close. Sarah wiped the blood from her blade. "They're testing us," she muttered, "sending scouts to see how weak we are." Ethan stared at the corpse. The alien's armor was advanced, far beyond anything humanity had ever created. Yet, here it was, dead at their feet. The realization sent a shiver through him. "They think we're weak," he said. "They're wrong." Jonas nudged the body with his foot. "What do we do with it?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "We study it." The group moved deeper into the cave, dragging the alien corpse with them. Every moment counted. They needed to learn everything they could: its armor, its weapons, its biology. Knowledge was power, and right now, power was the only thing standing between them and annihilation. Deep in the cave, under the dim light of their torches, they stripped the alien's armor piece by piece. The material was unlike anything they had seen before, flexible yet impossibly strong. Its weapon, though damaged in the fight, still pulsed with an eerie blue light. Ethan picked it up, feeling the weight in his hands. "If we can figure out how this works." Sarah met his gaze. "Then we might have a chance." A sudden tremor shook the cave. Dust and small rocks rained down from above. The air filled with a low, rumbling hum. Something deep, something powerful. Jonas's face went pale. "That's not just a scout ship." Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew what was coming. The aliens weren't just hunting them anymore. They were bringing the full force of their technology down on them. Sarah grabbed her gear. "We need to move." Ethan hesitated. The caves had been their home, their safe haven for generations. But now, the walls felt like a tomb closing in. Another tremor. This time, louder, closer. Jonas swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Ethan gripped the alien weapon in his hands, his jaw tightening. "We fight." The air trembled with an unnatural hum, a deep vibration that sent a shiver through every survivor hiding in the caves. The aliens had finally stopped playing. No more scouts, no more small squads. They were bringing their machines of war, the towering constructs that had crushed civilizations long before humanity had ever dared to rise against them. Ethan could hear it, mechanized footsteps, a rhythmic pounding against the desert floor outside. Something enormous moved beyond the cave's entrance, its presence alone making the very rock seem to shrink inward. Then came the glow, pale blue light filtering in through the cracks, flickering against the walls like ghostly fire. Sarah was already on her feet, securing her weapons. Jonas clenched his fists, his face pale but determined. The others, those who had followed Ethan this far, looked to him now, waiting, trusting. He wasn't sure he deserved that trust. The truth was, they were outmatched. The aliens had technology that defied human understanding, weapons that could wipe them out in seconds. And yet, here they were, humanity's last remnants, standing in defiance on an alien world that had never been theirs. Ethan took a deep breath. "We can't stay." Jonas gave a stiff nod. "We won't get far. Not with those things out there." Sarah motioned for silence, pressing herself against the rock wall near the entrance. "They're waiting. They know we're here." Of course they did. The aliens were patient. They didn't need to rush in blindly. They had the advantage. Let the humans panic. Let them make a mistake. That was the strategy. But Ethan had learned something in the last few weeks. The aliens might be advanced, but they had weaknesses. They saw humans as primitive, as prey. And prey could be unpredictable. He turned to the others. "We use the tunnels." The caves stretched far beyond what most of them knew. Twisting paths, forgotten passages that led deep beneath the surface. It was risky. Some tunnels collapsed long ago. Others led to dead ends. But it was their best shot. Sarah nodded. "We'll need to move fast." Jonas hesitated. "And if they follow us?" Ethan met his gaze. "Then we make sure they regret it." The group moved swiftly, stepping carefully over loose rock as they descended deeper into the caves. The air grew thick with dust, the scent of damp stone filling their lungs. The darkness swallowed them, but they pressed forward, guided by flickering torches and instinct. Then a sound, a deep metallic whirring from above. "They're sending in drones," Sarah hissed. Ethan cursed. The aliens weren't going to wait anymore. The tunnel behind them lit up with an eerie glow. A mechanical hum grew louder. The drones had entered the caves, scanning with sharp, piercing beams of light. They had seconds. "Run," Ethan barked. The group bolted, their footsteps echoing through the narrow corridor. The walls blurred past as they sprinted, breath ragged, legs burning. Behind them, the drones gave chase, their sleek forms gliding effortlessly through the air. A bright flash, a crackling sound. Something exploded behind them. Jonas screamed, clutching his arm as he stumbled. Ethan grabbed him, pulling him forward even as the heat of the blast seared the air around them. They weren't going to make it. Then Sarah did the unthinkable. She turned, knife in hand, and charged the nearest drone. A blur of movement, a flash of steel, then sparks. The drone sputtered, its sleek form jerking violently before crashing to the ground. The others hesitated for a fraction of a second. That was all Ethan needed. "Keep moving," he shouted. They ran. The tunnels twisted, turned, descended deeper. The sound of drones faded behind them. For a moment, just a moment, it seemed like they had escaped. Then, the ground beneath them gave way. Ethan barely had time to shout before they plunged into the darkness below. Cold air rushed past him. His stomach lurched as he fell, the world spinning. Then, impact. Pain shot through his body as he hit something hard, rolling across uneven stone. Dust filled his lungs. Somewhere nearby, someone groaned. Silence. Then a flickering light, a strange glow from deeper within the cavern. Ethan pushed himself up, ignoring the throbbing in his side. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, and what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't just a cavern. It was something else. Something ancient. Massive structures loomed in the shadows, half buried beneath layers of dust and time. Strange symbols lined the walls, pulsing faintly with an otherworldly energy. Jonas coughed, groaning as he pulled himself up. What is this place?" Sarah, bleeding but still standing, looked around with wide eyes. "It's not alien," she whispered. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. No, it wasn't. It was human. Ethan took a slow, measured breath as he gazed at the ancient structures towering in the cavern. Dust, untouched for millennia, coated the walls, yet the faint glow of symbols flickered with undeniable energy. This place was not alien. It was human. Jonas ran a hand over the strange markings, his fingers trembling. This shouldn't be possible. His voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah turned, scanning their surroundings, her body tense. If this is human, then why was it buried? And why don't we know about it? Ethan didn't have an answer, but something deep in his bones told him that this place was important, that it was waiting. The others, those who had followed him, those who had suffered alongside him, began to stir. The fall had shaken them, but they were still alive, still human, still fighting. A low hum vibrated through the chamber. The air seemed charged with invisible energy. Jonas stepped back. Did you hear that? Ethan did. It wasn't just a sound. It was a call. Something deeper, older. Then the glow intensified. Symbols on the walls ignited in golden light, pulsing in a rhythmic pattern. The cavern trembled. A deep groan, like the shifting of an ancient machine, echoed all around them. Sarah gripped her weapon tighter. Ethan, what is this place? He had no idea, but he stepped forward anyway. As soon as his foot touched the center of the chamber, the ground beneath him shifted. The dust of forgotten time was swept away, revealing something beneath the surface. Metal. Circular. A platform, rising slowly from the ground, its edges lined with glowing inscriptions. A voice, not spoken, but felt, rippled through the air. Designation confirmed. Awakening protocols engaged. The survivors tensed, weapons raised, eyes wide. Ethan barely managed to whisper, "Awakening what?" The cavern rumbled. Dust fell from above. The platform fully emerged, and in the center, embedded within the structure, was something unmistakable. Armor. Not just any armor. Human armor. Unlike anything they had ever seen. Sleek, reinforced plating. A design that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. It pulsed with the same golden energy that lined the walls. Sarah let out a breath. That's human tech, but this is older than anything we know. Jonas reached out but stopped just short of touching it. It looks like it was meant for someone. His gaze flickered to Ethan. Ethan felt his heart pound. The hum grew stronger. The armor was waking up. Then, a deafening boom shook the cavern. From above, shouts, movement, shadows descending through the crumbling tunnel. The aliens had found them. Sarah cursed. We need to move. Ethan didn't think. He stepped onto the platform. The moment his foot touched the surface, the armor reacted. Golden light surged through the cavern. The plating unfolded, shifting like liquid metal, reaching toward him. Then, it moved. Faster than thought, the armor latched onto him. Plates clicked into place, wrapping around his arms, his chest, his legs. Energy coursed through him like fire and lightning. Jonas staggered back. Ethan, what are you? Ethan clenched his fists. The armor was alive. It was more than metal. It was something more. Sarah's eyes widened. Ethan, your eyes. He sought it now. Information streamed into his mind. Schematics, language, history. This armor, it had been waiting. For him. Above them, the aliens descended. A war machine, built to kill, loomed over the edge, weapons primed. It fired. Ethan raised his hand without thinking. A pulse of golden energy erupted from his palm. The blast struck the machine midair, sending it crashing down in a heap of twisted metal. Silence. The survivors stared at him. Jonas exhaled. Holy. Sarah's grip on her weapon loosened. Ethan, what did you just do? Ethan looked at his armored hands. He could feel the power beneath his fingertips, the weight of history resting on his shoulders. He turned toward the tunnels, where the aliens were regrouping. They had spent 50,000 years suppressing humanity. But humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were taking back their world, and Ethan was going to lead them.